Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the event. As a reminder, please silence your cell phones and no video or sound recording at all. And now, please welcome the State Director for Americans for Prosperity, Mississippi, Russ Latino.
Well, boy, howdy. I think there are some people who are interested in the 3rd Congressional District. On behalf of Americans for Prosperity, Mississippi, I want to welcome you to our 3rd Congressional District Republican primary debate. It is exciting to see hundreds of people packed into the 2 Mississippi museums for this exciting event. It's even more exciting in some ways to think of the thousands of people that are watching on live stream right now on Americans for Prosperity Mississippi's Facebook page. Y'all Politics is running it on their Facebook page. I think the Clarion Ledger is also running it. Super Talk Mississippi, who's set up in the back, is running a live stream. They're also broadcasting this entire debate on their radio stations across the 3rd Congressional District. And so we're really excited and appreciate our broadcast partners who are ensuring that the citizens in the 3rd Congressional District are informed about the policies of the candidates who are running and vying to represent them. There are 730,000 people, roughly, in the 3rd Congressional District. And so this is a big deal. We are appreciative of the 6 candidates who have been running the roads, talking to a lot of different folks over 24 counties to take time to be here tonight to answer questions for us. We're appreciative about 200 people, some of the people in this audience, sent questions into us, things that they wanted us to consider and ask the candidates tonight. So we're really appreciative of that. But most importantly, we're appreciative of you. We're appreciative of the people that are watching at home or listening at home. You are why Americans for Prosperity exist. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Americans for Prosperity, we are the nation's largest state-based grassroots organization. We've got 36 state chapters, including in Mississippi. We've got 3.2 million activists across the country. And we are dedicated to defending and advancing the foundations of freedom and tearing down barriers to opportunity. We favor free speech unabashedly. We favor free markets unabashedly, lower taxes, fewer regulations, and less intrusion into your lives. And we exist to recruit, educate, and mobilize people in support of those policies. Now, I will tell you this. I've been around Mississippi politics for a long time. A lot of the people in the room have been around Mississippi politics for a long time. Political forums in Mississippi politics are a common thing. Political debates are not. We intend to end that, and it starts tonight. We think there's no better educational opportunity for citizens and no better proving grounds for candidates to stand under some hot lights and answer some questions. Real hard-hitting questions. And so without further ado, I want to introduce some of the people who will be asking those questions. Sarah Ulmer is with Y'all Politics, new media. She's an upcoming star, does a great job. Our moderator tonight doesn't really need introduction, but I'll introduce him anyway. Jeff Pender is with the Clarion Ledger. He was part of a Pulitzer Prize winning team when he was with the Sun-Herald. I think 30 years of political reporting experience, give or take. And we're really pleased to have Jeff with us. I want to sit down, give Jeff a chance to tell you a little bit about the debate rules. We're going to introduce the candidates, and then, as Lane Mills used to say, we'll get it on. Thank you, guys. Mills.
Good evening. Thank you for attending tonight's 3rd District U.S. House Republican primary debate. I'm going to refer to some notes because I'm going to read off some of the ground rules. Tonight's debate will allow each candidate to give a 2-minute opening statement. Then we're going to dive into questions. Each questions on taxes and spending, healthcare, and jobs and the economy. Those are the main categories. Each candidate will be permitted 2 minutes to answer a question. If a candidate is specifically referenced by another candidate, they will have 30 minutes to respond. 30. Yes, 30 seconds, sorry, not 30 minutes. And speaking of that, we have this contraption over here, I'm told has an obnoxious buzzer, so we ask the candidates to be conscious of the time, and we will, at some point interrupt if they run over. Our questions tonight, I think Russ may have mentioned this, primarily come from audience members in advance of the debate. Some really good questions, I believe. They were agreed to by the three of us on this panel. After the questions period tonight, each candidate will also have 2 minutes to close. The questions tonight have not been shared with the candidates in advance. Each candidate has received a blank notepad. They're allowed to take notes. If you see them, they're not cheating. They're not looking at cheat sheets. For the audience, we ask that you limit your applause to the close of the debate and to right now as we introduce the candidates as they come out. One last thing was also going to say, straws were drawn to determine the order of podiums and the order of candidates taking questions and making opening and closing remarks. So without further ado, let's bring out our candidates. Okay. I'll go ahead. We have Catherine Tate from Jackson. We have Michael Guest from Brandon. We have Morgan Dunn from McGee. We have Perry Parker from Seminary. We have Whit Hughes from Madison. And we have Sally Doty from Brookhaven. And the order for our opening remarks, we're going to start again. This was done by drawing straws, and we're going to start with you, Mr. Parker.
So welcome to the great debate. My name is Perry Parker, and my wife Ida, my wife of 29 years, is in the audience. My sons Bo and Harry are watching at home. Well, not at home. They're actually at their job. Someone in the family needs to be working for a living. So I am not a polished speaker, but I'm getting lots of practice this week, and I'm starting to have fun with it. But I tell you what I am. I am a conservative. I'm a Christian. I'm a defender and protector of our Second Amendment rights. I also believe in a strong military, and I believe in honoring the promises made to our veterans. But to me, those are requirements, or they should be, to be your representative from Mississippi's 3rd District. What differentiates me? Why am I the best candidate? Well, you're going to hear tonight from candidates talking about hard work and fighting for the people, and those are good things. We need to do those things. But fighting and working hard are not enough. We need to be smart and have a plan. I'm the son of a postman and a teacher from Sumrall. I went on to be an executive from Goldman Sachs, run multiple global businesses. I also was part of a group that founded a bank in the state that employs over 500 people. I own and operate a farm in the 3rd District. What separates me is my intellect and my ideas. I have a plan to grow the economy of the state of Mississippi. My ideas, my experience will allow me to promote industry in Mississippi from this congressional office. I look forward tonight to proving to you that my ideas and my plan are the best thing for this congressional seat. Thank you.
Ms. Dunn, I believe you're next.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for coming. 3 reasons why I am the person to advocate for you in Washington, D.C. 1, I'm a business leader. I'm not a politician. Who better to drain the swamp than someone that's never been a part of it? Number 2, I'm a healthcare specialist. My life's work has been revolving around healthcare. I experienced firsthand the destruction Obamacare did to our health system. It crippled our healthcare industry, and it destroyed our rural health. Number 3, and this is most important to me, I know Mississippi. I know it as a wife. I know it as a mother. I know it as a business owner. I've lived just about my entire life in McGee, where Chris and I, my husband, have been married 15 years. We're currently raising our kids there. They are my rock. You want to know anything about me or about the way I tick? 4 words: Chris, Sawyer, Ava, and Wynn, who are here. They are the reason I'm standing up here, because I want to make Mississippi better for them. I want the world that I grew up in to exist when they decide to settle down with their families. Let me rephrase. I want it to thrive. We do not have enough people in Washington, D.C. that understand our world in Mississippi. I do. We have got to stop accepting the status quo, and we need somebody that is not afraid to stand up and show them what Mississippi is about. I'm Morgan Dunn, and I'm asking for your vote on June 5th for the primary for the House of Representatives, District 3. Thank you.
Mr. Guest.
Good evening. I want to thank the Americans for Prosperity for hosting tonight's event, and I want to thank each of you for being here. For those in attendance, for those listening by way of radio, for those who are watching by way of live stream, thank you for caring about the future of our country. And I hope at the conclusion of tonight that I will have earned your support. With me tonight is my wife of 20 years, my parents, my wife's parents, and my 2 sons, Kennedy and Patton. Since this campaign began, we have been traveling throughout the district, telling others about my background as a lifelong conservative Republican and where I stand on issues that are important to our state and to our nation. I have discussed my record and have discussed my experience as a prosecutor, and how for the last 22 years I have worked with the men and women of law enforcement to make our communities great places to live and to worship and to raise a family. As District Attorney, my office has prosecuted more than 20,000 felony cases, and we've worked to return more than $20 million to law enforcement, taken from those who would sell or transport illegal drugs. As a prosecutor, I have often taken on complex cases with many moving parts. That has given me an understanding of a wide variety of issues. It's taught me the importance of preparation, of standing on my beliefs, of working with others to accomplish what is right. That experience will allow me to tackle the important issues that we will be facing in Congress. I look forward to answering questions tonight proposed by our moderators. And again, I thank you for allowing me to be here with you this evening.
Mr. Hughes.
Well, thank you to AFP for tonight's event. Russ, it's great to be here with you and Sarah and Jeff and these candidates. I want to recognize my wife, Shelley, who's in the audience, and make sure she knows how much I love and appreciate her. Shelley and I are from this area. We both went to Mississippi State. I received undergraduate and graduate degrees there while playing baseball and basketball. We've been married for 20 years, and we've been living in Madison with all 3 of our children since 2003. My background is in conservative politics on national, state, and local levels. Economic development experience as Deputy Director of Mississippi Development Authority. I've owned and operated my own consulting business. In recent years, I've been the Chief Development Officer at Baptist Health Systems here in Jackson. I resigned from that position 12 weeks ago to enter this race. And I've made it clear that I'm going to work hard in all 24 counties in this district. And I have. In fact, 2 weeks ago, Shelley and I campaigned in all 24 counties, and we did it in just 48 hours. And that's reflective of where we are in this race. I spent a lot of time helping people learn more about me and why I'm running. Now we're talking about what I'm for and what I'll do representing this district in Congress. That's why I've released WIT's game plan, a snapshot of my policy priorities. I'm obviously not going to be able to touch on all those issues tonight, but I want you to know that in Congress, I'll fight for more jobs and a stronger economy, lower taxes, fewer regulations. Let's get government out of the way so we have a chance to be successful. I'll fight for immigration reform and for securing the border. I'll fight on debt and spending. The track we're on right now is not sustainable. I want to be a part of changing the spending culture in Washington. I'm going to support our military and our veterans. And I'm going to work hard every day for every community in every county in this district. I'm glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Ms. Tate.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Oops. We okay? We sure we okay?
We're on life support. It's all right.
Defibrillator. I'm so glad to be here. There's so much that I'd love to discuss with you, but in 2 minutes, let me just give you a little brief story. I think I represent the American dream. I absolutely love America, and I think most of that, if a good part of that, is because of my work in other countries. My first job, I dropped out of Millsaps and had an opportunity to work contracting with the Department of Defense. Won 3 competitive bids to travel with the Department of Defense all over the world. Been in Turkey. I've looked into Syria over the border, Germany, and in Guantanamo Bay, etc. And I thought of something last night when I was talking to somebody, and they said, we were talking about term limits. I think our government's gotten way out of control, and I'm really frustrated with career politicians. I thought if Congress people were required to live in barracks in D.C. while they served, we might not have a problem with term limits. I worked my way through school. My parents, after I dropped out the first time, my parents said, you do what you want to, you're paying for it. Well, wonderful experience. So I worked my way through 2 degrees, Mississippi State University, art degree. I got a wonderful job that I wanted. I was well prepared, got a job as an artist, and then as the state arts representative, where I had the opportunity to represent Mississippi in various venues all over the country, including Washington, D.C., and then a master's at University of Texas, and I'm a constant learner. I've taught, been working in education for 26 years and in private enterprise with McGraw-Hill Corporation in Dallas, where I was recruited from my work here in Mississippi and enjoyed working there and broke records. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stody.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here tonight and really being concerned about this congressional race and taking the time to devote your evening to hearing what we all have to offer and what makes each one of us different. The thing that makes me different is that I have an A rating from this very organization, from Americans for Prosperity. I have served in the Mississippi Senate for 2 terms. I'm the chairman of Energy. I'm vice chairman of Judiciary A. And I really consider the time that I've spent during those 2 terms not as being a career politician, because in Mississippi we have a part-time citizen legislator. I consider what I do public service, because I know what it is to be accountable for my voting record and also to balance the concerns of my constituents that have many different agendas. As I've traveled around these 24 counties, many people have said to me, Sally, what difference does it make? What can you do in Washington, or what can any of us do? I think we can do a lot, and we've already taken an important step by sending a president who is turning our country around. And now I believe that we must send a strong legislator, because that's what this job is. It is legislating. We must have someone who can make, manage, and move legislation. I have a proven track record. I have an A rating by the NRA. I have a 100% pro-life voting record. I have an A from BIPEC, which rates us on our business votes. And I've spearheaded campaign finance reform through my elections committee when I was the chair of that. I believe that just as I have done in the Mississippi Senate, I will be the most effective, accountable, and accessible congressman for the 3rd Congressional District. And I ask for your vote and support.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There it goes again. We would again ask you to please hold all applause until the closing statements, now that we're getting into the questions. And The first question will go to you, Mr. Hughes, and I will be asking it. You've all said recently, I believe, that you would have voted against the recent $1.3 trillion omnibus bill, which contained billions of dollars from Mississippi as well. Federal spending accounts for an estimated 33% of the state's GDP. More Mississippians work in government than in any other sector, and more than 40% of personal income in Mississippi comes from government. How can Mississippi wean itself from federal spending without economic disaster?
Well, thank you for that question, Jeff. I'll tell you the first thing in terms of spending that comes to mind is that we have to improve our process. We cannot continue to pass out 2,200-page bills and telling people you're going to vote on that 36 hours later. I mean, who runs a business that way? We've got to do better than that, and Americans deserve better than that. In terms of spending, we've got to address the runaway spending. Right now, our debt is $21 trillion. 10 years ago, when Obama got elected, it was $10 trillion. The numbers are going up. Look at our current budget. We're spending $4.4 trillion while we're bringing in $3.4 trillion. Another $1 trillion gap. And we're paying $300 and something billion in interest. And we have nothing to show for those dollars. We have to address this issue. Anybody that has a family or runs a business knows that you can't continue spending more than you're bringing in. And I'll tell you another thing that is noteworthy. We talk a lot about how much we owe to countries in other parts of the world. Not all of them are on our best friends list. But I'll tell you, over 50% of our debt is tied to entities associated with retirement for Americans. Whether you're talking about the Social Security Trust Fund, or mutual funds, or public or private pension funds. So if we risk defaulting on that debt on any level, not only are we going to alienate ourselves with countries in other parts of the world, we risk impacting our current and future retirees in a negative way. We have to do a better job. We have to identify priorities. We have to establish game plans, and then we have to stick to those game plans.
Thank you, Ms. Stody. The same question. Would you like it repeated?
I don't think so. So, as I understand it, the question is, how in Mississippi can we wean ourselves away from some of that federal spending? So in Mississippi, our Medicaid budget is about the same as our general fund budget. It is over $6 billion. I believe Medicaid is out of control, and we must do something to get our people where they can not be so dependent on the federal government. I think we're seeing that with the economy has really turned around. Our unemployment rate in Mississippi is the lowest that it's been in many, many years, and in fact, maybe even since we started counting. So this is one thing that is going to help. The tax bill, the tax cuts that the Congress passed back in late December, that is helping our economy grow, so that should reduce our dependence on federal spending. Another entitlement program is SNAP. SNAP, which is food stamps, supplemental nutritional assistance to needy families. It doubled under the Obama administration. And that is block granted down to our state level, and I believe that we have taken some steps as a state, some requirements to help people get off of that assistance and move to self-sufficiency. We have a problem with worker participation rates in Mississippi. We do. And I think some of these entitlement reforms will help us with that program and give people the dignity that they need to stand up, work for a living, and really have a sense of self-worth.
Thank you. Same question, Ms. Tate.
That is a huge problem. 33% of the dollars that we receive are federal dollars. Would you repeat
Oh, I'm
that?
sorry. Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
An estimated 33% of the state's GDP is based on federal spending.
Okay.
More Mississippians work in government than any other sector, and at least 40% of personal income here comes from government. And key question, how can Mississippi wean itself from federal spending?
One very hard thing that I've thought about recently is how to liberate people from dependence on government. Now, working for the government is an entirely different issue, and I've done that. I will just say briefly, I think it was Milton Friedman that said, or maybe an economist, excuse me, benevolence is going to be you're not going to find benevolence as a motivator for someone to work and give their best. So, in government service, they're working for a paycheck, and those that go above and beyond because of a sense of duty or because their parents taught them to or whatever are rare, unfortunately. You know how government works. The other problem, though, is those who are dependent on things like SNAP, welfare, housing assistance, and Medicare and Medicaid pays for basically tearing apart families, illegitimate births, etc., and dependency, and perpetuates a form of bondage. That will have to be broken. It's going to have to come from the people. And then it's also going to have to be supported by those of us who must assume responsibility for the poor among us. I happen to believe that once the poor are freed up and released from that bondage, I think we'll see a renaissance. I really believe in that spirit of the individual. A lot of that's going to be from families, from education, to encourage that. But I'm very hopeful that it's just going to take a magnanimous willingness on the part of those who make a living, and they're going to have to just step in and do more than even they're doing now, because if the government does it, then we don't do it. So.
Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Guest?
We are at our current pace going to be unable to continue the spending that we've seen time and time again, both on our federal level and our state level. I believe that if we are going to rein in spending, then we must look at both the size and the scope of our government on a state and a federal level. I believe that the federal government, when money is appropriated, that we need to eliminate federal mandates. Too often when states receive money, they are received with strings attached. There are matching dollars that are required to be put in. There is a one-size-fits-all plan. Washington says we are going to appropriate money to you, but you have to spend the money in the same manner in Mississippi that we do in California, that we do in Wyoming. I believe that the best form of government is local government. I believe that dollars and how dollars are appropriated and spent are best determined on the county level, and they're determined on the state level. And so what I would like to see is that when we, being the federal government, if the federal government is going to appropriate any funds to the state of Mississippi, that our elected leaders, our governor, our legislators, our county supervisors, that they determine the place that and the manner in which those funds are to be spent. And so, again, we must continue to rein in spending. We must reduce the size and the scope of government. And then we must have local input on any monies that are being appropriated here in our state.
Thank you. Mrs. Dunn?
Hi. So a couple things. I think it's a two-part question, one being federal, one being state. As far as the federal spending goes, we have to get our arms wrapped around our regulatory and policy process from a federal level. We have to balance the budget, which means, in the business world, revenue equals your expenses. That is not a common practice in Washington, D.C. As related to government regulation and red tape, it stifles innovation. When you stifle innovation, your small businesses, your businesses, they hurt. They're the ones that are impacted directly. In order for us to get Mississippi's economy, which I think is a state-driven initiative, not a federal, because we want to pull the regulation down and let the states regulate. The states need to own their budgets. Small business creates jobs, not the government. It's kind of like what President Trump is doing right now. He's taking some sucker punches to some major objectives that we have going on right now. That's because he's a business person. He's negotiating. Give him a few. As related to Mississippi, we might have to take a sucker punch and reevaluate and make some hard decisions, not only to correct it from a federal perspective, but also to correct it from a state perspective. We cannot continue with the entitlement programs. They're 2/3 of our budget. 2/3. We're going to have to make some hard decisions. People are going to get mad. People are going to have their feelings hurt. That is part of the game. Decisions have to be made. My husband and I own a business. We make payroll every week. We make hard decisions to make that payroll. That is business.
Thank you. Mr. Parker?
Jeff, what you described there has been building up in excess of 50 years. Mississippi's dependency on Washington and federal dollars. But you know what? It's already changing. It's changing in Starkville. It's changing here in Madison and Rankin County in the Jackson metro area. And what changes it are investment dollars. This is my whole program. Use this congressional office to promote investment in the state of Mississippi, bring private investment dollars. And we can do that. Our people are great people, and our resources are undervalued. Our cost base for a company coming into Mississippi is much lower. I can give you the numbers anywhere from 30 to 75% of the cost in competing states. We'll use the model that we see working in the Golden Triangle, Starkville, Madison, and Ridgeland, and we'll spread it throughout southwest part of the district, through Meridian, where investment dollars will be put to work. I have the contacts to reach out to people to help to bring investment dollars. We already have economic development people working. They're doing a good job, but this office can be used to promote that if it is the office's focus. And from that, you will see an automatic lessening of that dependency. That's how we're going to do it, Jeff. We're going to do it with investment dollars coming into the state. We're going to raise expectations on the entrepreneurs who are already have businesses here. We have a great junior college system. We have the groundwork, the foundation. This is going to happen. But I believe this opportunity of this election and this congressional office will speed up that process that we already see happening.
Thank you.
We want to dig a little bit deeper into, let me see if that's on. Hello? Hello? I'll just be loud. There we go. In fiscal year 2016, the U.S. government took in $3.3 trillion in taxes. That same fiscal year, spending on 5 categories: Social Security, healthcare programs like Medicare and Medicaid, welfare, defense, and debt service, accounted for 95% of the revenue taken in. We've talked generally about the need to reform spending, but without addressing those 5 things, it seems impossible to truly reform spending. So, Senator Doty, do you have any specific ideas on how to make a dent in the spending trajectory?
So when you look at the pie chart that talks about our spending, you do see the majority of it is with Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid. So if we can get some of our health care costs in check through different devices, I think coordination of care would be very important. I know firsthand, I've cared for my mother who's wheelchair bound and has multiple issues. And it is so difficult. I'm an attorney, my sister's an accountant, my other sister's a nurse. We have a difficult time coordinating her care. And that makes a lot of expense when you cannot do that effectively. And that is a major problem. From what I understand, about 10% of patients in those programs require 60% of our dollars. So that's one issue that I think we could do. We also have to look at our discretionary spending. I'm on the Joint Legislative Budget Committee here in the State Senate. There are 5 senators, 5 House members, and we balance our budget here in the state of Mississippi. And I just have to think if, part-time legislators in the state of Mississippi can balance our budget of the poorest state in the nation, that certainly our Congress could balance the budget of the wealthiest nation in the world.
Ms. Tate, same question to you. Specific spending reforms to non-discretionary spending that occurs at the federal level.
There are a number of wonderful plans out there. I'm sure the Americans for Prosperity have developed plans. Again, what I said earlier, it may not have been comprehensible. It has to come from the will of the people. We know what to do. We know exactly what to do. It's a matter of doing it and having the courage to do it and taking the flack that will inevitably occur and stepping up and allowing that change to happen. But we have to cut those entitlements in broad terms. The government's job is very specifically enumerated in our Constitution and in our state constitution. And when the government strays into areas that it should not be involved in, it's none of their business. Health care, for example, and actually Social Security needs tremendous reform. That's not the government's business. So we know what to do. It's just a matter of having the courage to do it.
Mr. Guest?
You know, I believe that as a representative, one of the first things that you should do is to tackle a budget. We should not be operating from continuing resolution to continuing resolution year after year after year. We must be prepared to tackle the entitlement issue. There has been a reluctance from the Republicans, from the Democrats, to even look at tackling entitlements. I think the first thing you look at is a zero baseline budgeting. That instead of automatic increases of these programs year after year after year, that those budgets be set. And if those budgets are going to be increased, those be increased by Congress. Those not be automatic increases that occur time and time again. We must get health care costs under control. We continue to have health care greatly outpacing the cost of inflation. I believe that we need to do away with Obamacare, that the federal government needs to get out of the health care business. I believe that health care needs to be offered through private markets. And I believe that we ought to, as citizens, we ought to be able to buy whatever type of health care that we want. We should not be mandated by the federal government that we buy certain programs that meet their criteria. As a consumer, I should be able to go on the free market and I should be able to purchase whichever type of health care that I see fit for myself and my family. And I'm a huge believer in national security, but we must make sure that our defense dollars are being spent appropriately. We must make sure that they're being spent to properly train and equip our men and women and our military so that when we send them abroad, when we send them to harm's way, that they can go and that they can complete that mission and that they can come home safely. So I believe that there is reforms that can and will be made if we have people who have the guts enough to take that on and tackle that in Washington, D.C.
Ms. Dunn, any specific reforms to non-discretionary spending that you would think of?
So I would call it regulation, regulation, regulation. The more regulation you have, the bigger government you have. That's part of it. As related to health care specifically, the government needs to get out of the health insurance. It does need to move into free markets. We do need to have choice from a patient perspective and from a healthcare provider perspective. But we also have to ensure that the insurances are allowing our patients and our consumers the appropriate access to the healthcare, because that is something that is very it makes me pause, especially from a state perspective. So bringing health care from Washington, D.C. to the state of Mississippi will help decrease that. We have got to get our arms wrapped around the entitlement programs. You know, having those automatic renewals, it's unacceptable. In business, you take your expenses and you take your revenue. If they don't equal, you figure out how to get them equal. That is the basics of business. If you don't have a budget and you don't have a revenue to support your expenses, you cut them. Those are core business maneuvers that the average business owner, those decisions are made every single day. So getting our arms wrapped around the spending and the budgets, it takes someone that understands business. Getting politics out of decision making is the only way we're going to get there. The political game will continue to be played as long as we have the status quo in Washington, D.C.
Mr. Parker.
Sure, Russ. I believe the question was talking about specific reductions to entitlements, specific cuts in entitlements. So I don't think I've heard that from any of the candidates so far. So why don't I give it a shot and let's see. There must be something dangerous about talking about specific cuts to entitlements. But with our strong economy and our low interest rates that we enjoy today, if Congress would tackle this, one way to do that, the real problem in Social Security is past the year 2030. What we could do is look at having a gradually lowering of entitlement benefits past the year 2030. On a table, we can make that work. We have strong revenue today. We have low interest rates. We can borrow looking for out past 2030. And yes, we're talking about lowering those benefits, but past 2030. And really, Russ, it's the only way. Otherwise, the numbers won't work. And let me tell you something about these low interest rates we enjoy today. We will not enjoy them forever into the future. There will be a time when the U.S. debt is not sought after by the investment world, both in the U.S. and around the world. So Congress does have to tackle this. And here's another thing that would help with that. Term limits would help with it, because politicians want to go to Washington and they want to stay forever and a day, and certainly Mississippi is benefited by that structure, but it's a new day and a new time. And Jeff talked about it in the previous question about how dependent we are on Washington. It won't go on forever. Term limits are a way. If we have term limits, we can tackle entitlements because politicians won't be so worried about staying in Washington forever. So yes, I will happy to talk about those hard cuts in entitlements down the road. We honor the promises for the next 10 to 20 years, but past that, the promises would not be there.
Mr. Hughes.
Russ, in my opening comments, I talked about how I want to make a priority out of fighting spending. And you can't be serious about that dialogue without addressing what's going on in entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Earlier, I mentioned our current budget, $4.4 trillion. 2.7 of that is mandatory spending on things like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. 1.3 discretionary, and then I also mentioned we're spending $300 billion something a year on interest, and we have nothing to show for it. So let's talk about Social Security. You're talking about 50+ million Americans. We have thousands of baby boomers reaching retirement age every day. If you look at program costs and you look at cash flow projections, it's not sustainable. We have to make some tough decisions so our seniors can rely on the programs that they've been paying into over the course of their lifetime. I think you have three options. Number one, you can raise taxes. Number two, you can borrow more money. Number three, you can be smarter and more disciplined about your spending. Identify priorities. Have a game plan. Stick to that game plan. I think I'll choose option number three. In terms of Medicaid, you're talking about 25% of our population, 700 and something thousand people. I really believe we ought to be innovative in our thinking here. Let's block grant these resources and send them to the states and encourage them to be more innovative in the way that they deliver on the Medicaid program. Let's also get federal roadblocks out of the way so we don't have to deal with ridiculous bureaucracy with people like CMS. The driving health care considerations in our Medicaid program here in Mississippi are different than they're going to be in other states like Minnesota or Missouri. So that's my attitude. I think we ought to identify priorities, have a game plan, and then stick to that game plan.
Several, if not all of you, have mentioned health care in the past two questions we've asked, so let's dive into that a little bit. In the 6 years that followed the passage of Obamacare, many Republicans have campaigned on repeal. Many of you have also said that you would like to see the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. Even before Obamacare, however, there was considerable growth in healthcare and insurance costs across the country. So whether Obamacare is eventually repealed or not, what are some of your specific ideas on how to reduce healthcare costs for Mississippians? Mrs. Tate, we'll start with you.
Well, again, healthcare is not the government's business. They've made it their business, but we'll have to just roll that back. I'm very disappointed that Republicans who campaigned on repealing Obamacare did not. I believe those in the Freedom Caucus caught a lot of flack for their stand against Obamacare. You can't do it alone. The will has to be there. But we've got to get out of the healthcare business and go back to fee-for-service. The argument against that is, well, hospitals take an oath they have to treat everyone who comes in. I can tell you from experience, actually, from my life living as a starving artist, and I've been robbed at gunpoint 3 times. I was shot. I have a bullet in my collarbone. When I went to the emergency care room, I was left to die because I did not have insurance at that time, until my parents came in 3 hours later. So I don't know that they have to treat everyone that comes in. In my experience, they did not. I'm not complaining. I lived. But fee-for-service, well, as I said before, we know the right thing to do. It's just doing it. It's going to take some finesse to get those other Republicans to keep their word, but we have to keep our word. Get out of the healthcare business.
Mr. Gass, some specifics on how you would plan to reduce healthcare costs.
You know, to reduce healthcare costs for the consumer, I believe that we need to be able to purchase the policies that we want on the free market. I become tired of the government telling me time and time again what is the best thing for myself and my family. As a husband, as a father, those should be decisions that I am making. They should not be mandated by the federal government. The federal government should not tell me that I have to have health insurance that meets certain criteria. If I want to know, and I should have the ability and the option to choose what I think is best. And so if we're going to reduce health care costs, I agree, we need to repeal the Obamacare system. We need to find free market solutions to where individuals can purchase insurance on the free market. We need to have options. Now just having 3 options is ludicrous. We need to be able to go back to the way it once was, where I can go out and I can negotiate with my insurance company about the benefits that I want to have, the deductibles that I want to meet, and those should be negotiable like anything else. And so I believe that the best policy is when the government gets out of our way, when the government allows us to do what we think is best for our family and for us to be able to make those decisions.
Mrs. Dunn, the same question.
Yes, so like I said earlier, I am a healthcare specialist. I have been championing rural health and health for the last 15 years. What Obamacare didn't do was consider all 3 lanes in health. You got 3 lanes: patient, provider, and insurer. Focused on one. The other problem is when you deal with state insurance lines, Mississippi is one of the highest, sickest, highest chronic states that there is. No insurance company is going to come to Mississippi and decrease premiums because we are such high risk. We have to, 1, lift the state lines and allow the true free markets to exist. Get the federal government's regulation out of it. Allow for families to choose and insurers to come in, but also regulate and allow for the providers to work with the insurances, but the patient having the ultimate choice. I developed one of the first national rural accountable care organizations as a population health. I currently consult for Rush Health Systems in Meridian. We have 15,000 Medicare lives in there, and we are at the point where they can choose what doctor they want to go to. It's no longer Medicare chooses. It's no longer the networks. They can choose what doctor they want to go to. That's where the patients need to get to.
Mr. Parker, how would you try to reduce those healthcare costs?
Sure. Again, Sarah, I think you talked about specific recommendations, so I'll try to do that. Number 1, I would allow insurance industry competition across state lines. Currently, that does not happen. And in a lot of cases, for a lot of consumers in the state of Mississippi, there's one insurance company. So we need to, that could be done. Congress can take action on that. Secondly, we need, and this calls on the industry to step up, but price transparency. It's difficult. I understand it's very difficult when you go to the hospital to know really what is behind your bill. Your bill is $856. What does that mean? The industry has to step up and provide price transparency, and as Ms. Dunn talked about, certainly part of that is government regulation. But if we can provide price price transparency that will lead us to consumers making choices, and that will start us down the correct road to lowering cost. Third, we have to understand there is a trade-off between innovation in healthcare and access. I lived in London. The access to healthcare, it was great. The innovation, the real healthcare, not so good. Did not like living under a single-payer healthcare system. So we have to understand in this country, we need innovation, but that will reduce access in a lot of cases, and that hurts Mississippians. So how do we deal with that? The fourth thing is government has a role to play to provide social insurance so that people less fortunate have access to health care. We are a caring society, and we're not going to shirk on that duty. So if we do the first three, it allows more of the fourth. Today, we're just doing the fourth. So 4 specific proposals.
Mr. Hughes?
Well, our healthcare system was broken before Obamacare. I would say that Obamacare made it worse. I'm very glad that the recent tax reforms are getting rid of the individual mandate. From a constitutional perspective, you'll never get me to understand how the federal government can mandate that American citizens purchase anything. You know, a lot of the healthcare discussions about accessibility, but we also have to talk about affordability too. The Obamacare one-size-fits-all mentality does nothing but drive up cost. Everybody in the room knows that, whether you're talking about a family or a business. Healthcare costs are going up. Insurance premium costs are going up. We have to focus on preventative care. We have to start rewarding healthcare providers based on provision of value and positive outcomes instead of volume. We have to have more options, more competition, more information, and more transparency in the marketplace. It's free market concepts like this that are going to make quality go up and costs go down. We got to get the government out of the way. And I tell you, whoever's representing this district in Congress has to be focused on doing all he or she can do to support community hospitals. These community hospitals are the backbone of our economy. And I can tell you firsthand, I understand how important they are from an economic development perspective. I understand how important they are from a healthcare perspective. And I understand how hard it is to make the numbers work in these community hospitals. I think of Baptist Health Systems and the community hospital we have in Carthage. One thing I'm really proud of is what we've done there in terms of telehealth and telemedicine. That's going to be part of the future of healthcare, both from an accessibility perspective and an affordability perspective. Now, if you talk about that on a separate but related track, you have to talk about the importance of broadband. We need more high-speed fiber in our rural communities. Thank goodness we have homegrown companies like C-Spire here in the 3rd District that are working on that every day, investing their time and effort and resources, enhancing our broadband capabilities. And in Congress, I'm going to do everything I can to support companies like C-Spire because I see the difference that they're making in our communities.
Mr. Doty, the same question.
Certainly, I agree with my colleagues who are up here about specific ideas to restore some transparency to cost, to have insurance across state lines, those things that are the usual talking points about reducing our health care cost after Obamacare. And really, we all know that Obamacare was just an attempt to socialize medicine here in the United States. And that is not the health care system that we are used to or that we deserve here. So I want to talk about a few different things. I think we've got to look at the portion of our budget, our federal budget, that pays for Medicare and for Medicaid is probably about 30%. I know that Medicaid is 11% of the federal budget, whereas defense is 15 or 16%. So that's a very large chunk of our federal budget. So I really do think we've got to get those costs under control. And I think in a compassionate way, we have to talk more about some personal responsibility. 50%, I think, of your health indicators are because of choices that you make. So we have to look at some personal responsibility and prevention, and really encourage prevention to keep these people healthy and all of us healthy before we have some sort of major health event. Again, earlier I mentioned coordination of care. That is another way to bring our costs down, to manage the care of people with multiple problems, to manage that more effectively and efficiently. And we've got to have some difficult decisions about end-of-life care as well, because the majority of health Medicare expenses are spent within the last 6 months of life. And so I would encourage everyone to have an advanced care directive and talk about with your loved ones how you want to handle that part of your life. Again, thank you.
Thank you. I believe this question starts with Mr. Guest. Congress has recently considered right to try legislation. It would allow terminally ill patients the ability to use drugs that are not currently authorized by the FDA. Would you support right to try legislation? If so, why? If not, why not?
Most definitely. I think, again, that the federal government needs to get out of our lives. We as individuals should make those decisions for ourselves and for our loved ones. If you are in a position where you are terminally ill, I think that you should be given every opportunity in the world to extend your life. You should be able to offer yourself and allow that medication to be tested on you. And I believe that it could have a dramatic increase. Now we are waiting years and years and years for drugs to make their way through the system, drugs many of which could be useful here today. So I would definitely be in favor of that. Again, I believe that we should do everything that we can to continue to get the government out of our lives. I believe we are overregulated. I believe the government has intruded in areas of our lives that they have no business being in. And one of those areas is your right to life, your right to treatment, and not only the right to treatment for yourself, but for your spouse and your children. So I would support that legislation, do everything that I could to see that became law.
Thank you. Ms. Dunn?
Absolutely. So the Trump administration came out with a white paper about a month and a half ago, specifically around this issue. A lot of it was because of how long it takes to get a drug approved through the FDA process. It was a very great white paper on pharmaceuticals. And absolutely, you support the right to try. We've got to get our arms wrapped around the FDA's policy and process that they develop internally, because it is not fair to someone that is end of life. Let them try it. That's innovation at its best. I do believe in some regulation from a pharmaceutical perspective if it's coming from other countries, but we've got to speed up that approval process and especially give specific advantages to loved ones and ones that are at end of life. Absolutely.
Mr. Bryan. Unequivocally, yes, Jeff. Some of you know my family is living that right now with a brother that has ALS. And so we're working through some of those issues right now. But I would go to Washington to support our president, who already is moving in this direction with the FDA. Again, Morgan touched on it, but the FDA has already made strides over the first 16 months of the Trump administration to make the process easier to approve drugs. There's a recent article in The Economist that was saying America on the current trajectory would be an example to the world. We already are. Here's where the innovation comes from. I would go to Washington and support even more of that, absolutely.
Mr. Hughes.
Yes, I would support right to try. I mean, and from my perspective, this is a basic premise of liberty and freedom. I mean, how in the world is a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. in a better position than you are or your family is to make those kind of health care decisions? So absolutely, yes, I would support right to try.
So, of course, it's easy to say I would support the right to try, and I certainly would. But the real issue here is who's going to pay for it. And so then it becomes a more difficult issue. If it is a very expensive treatment, is your insurer going to be required to pay for it, thus perhaps rising premiums for other people? If it is a Medicaid patient, is there going to be a claim for Medicaid to pay for that? So there are a lot of different issues around this right to try legislation, and I understand that from sometimes we have these unintended consequences. I hear that all the time serving in the Mississippi legislature. But I certainly would support right to try legislation and would understand that a patient who exercises that would be a private pay patient. Perhaps they would have private insurance that they could work together with for the treatment. But the payment issue is really what is at the heart of this question.
Yes, the right to try would give individual choice. I would certainly support it, and I would presume that the individual would have the option of paying for it. Beyond that, I would also hope that by the time I'm in a nursing home, that cannabis is legalized only for nursing homes. I'm sort of just kidding. But yes, I would support that.
Thank you. On that note, we'll switch gears. President Trump has recently implemented trade tariffs on steel and aluminum and certain final stage manufactured products. Historically, conservatives have opposed similar tariffs as being inconsistent with free market ideology. In Mississippi, there are manufacturers like Toyota and Nissan that rely on steel that gets imported. We also have a lot of farmers that export things like soybeans. Do you agree with President Trump's tariff policy, and what do you think it would mean for Mississippi?
Yes. Is that on? Can you hear me? Okay. Yes, I agree with the way President Trump is handling the negotiation process. That is the core at what he's doing. Let's be honest, he's a businessman. You have to have a little trust in his process. As related to tariffs, it could be devastating to our ag industry. Devastating. We're not going to let it get that far. We've got to trust the process. These trade agreements have been years in the making of negotiating. So we've got to trust our president, put a little faith behind him, and let him work out the trade deals to better our country and better our economy. I know our ag industry is a little nervous right now, but you got to have a little faith in the president that we put in office.
Okay. Mr. Perry?
Sure.
Or Mr. Parker, I'm sorry.
I'll answer.
It's that commercial.
I'll answer to either, Russ. Russ, as a political outsider who is taking inspiration from our president running as an outsider and becoming president of the United States, I'm a strong President Trump supporter. Having said that, I don't agree with every action, and I would argue and have a close relationship with the White House and argue against tariffs. I don't think tariffs are a tax on the consumers, and so I would argue against taxes. Against tariffs, I'd argue against taxes as well, by the way. But having said that, President Trump has made the decision to go down this road. So my role as a congressman would be to work with the White House and letting them know what is at risk in the state of Mississippi, and we are at risk, and what is at risk in these trade deals. And while we definitely have to call, so to speak, China to heel in some of their technology issues where they're stealing our technology, it should not rest on the back of the American farmer to fight this battle. It would be the role of the congressman to speak from the 3rd District of Mississippi to make sure that the Trump White House understood what part of our economy he was placing at risk and how we were going to mitigate that. And I believe American Farm Bureau has put forward some ways that we could do that. Look, the best thing to do is we don't fight this battle with tariffs, but we're going down that road. It's a high-stakes game, and we support the president. So we of course support our president. We're just going to make plain what is at risk for American farmers and how we can mitigate that.
Mr. Hughes, do you agree with the tariff policy, and what do you think the impact is on the Nissans and the Toyotas and the farmers in Mississippi?
Well, let me say this. I support our president. I want him to be successful. That means our country and our state have chances to be successful. But also I know that voters want somebody representing this district that's focused on more jobs and a stronger economy. So I have a little bit different point of view on this topic. Tariffs and trade wars, in my opinion, have a negative impact on jobs and consumer prices. And when you look at this district, the backbone is ag and natural resource industries. Mississippians make premium products that people all over the world want. So we need to be in support of trade. We don't need it to be impacted by tariffs and trade wars. We need more trade. We need to make sure it's fair. We need to make sure it's free. I think of what's going on right now with our soybeans. China's the 2nd biggest importer on a global scale of our soybeans. If we price ourselves out of the market, so to speak, if we put our Mississippi growers and producers out of the game, I'm quite sure there are growers and producers in South America that'll step in and fill the gap. So I break from the president a little bit on this topic. Again, I believe we need more trade, and we need to make sure that it's free and that it's fair.
The tariff issue certainly is difficult, because we have such competing interests here. But I think what we have to remember is the actions that the president have taken is focused on China. China, who is a communist country, who is a bad actor. The tariffs that have been put in place, there have been exemptions for Mexico, for Canada, for many of our other trading partners, for the European Union. So really we're focused on China, who has been a bad actor in so many different ways. I read a statistic that said 70 or 80% of the software used in Chinese businesses is pirated software. So I understand what the president is doing, targeting China to try to get them to the table and get them to respond in a more equal way to the United States. And I'm comfortable with this because I do know that power regarding tariffs is really reserved to the Congress. It is in the Constitution, it is a congressional power, but the Congress has allowed the executive branch to take over most of those responsibilities, and President Trump has only been able to make these decisions because there was a determination that there was a national defense issue at stake. So at any point, really, the Congress, if they had the will to do it, could take a vote as to whether or not that was an appropriate use of his power. So I think our checks and balances are working. I think the president is negotiating. We all knew he would do that, and so I do support his policies right now.
If you were in Congress, would you vote for the tariffs then?
Not at this particular point, and it seems to be a very fluid situation.
Okay. Mrs. Tate?
Yes, this is a temporary situation and it's very necessary. I would vote in support of it to correct past wrongs, and my thinking is that farmers and manufacturers surely have enough business savvy to understand that this was coming on. The president campaigned on it, and if we can just weather this short-term discomfort, I think the long-term benefits will play out, and the world will know we're serious about these things. 100% tariff from India, for example, on our Harley-Davidsons is hardly fair. That's not free trade. China's protectionist policies do not allow us to free trade, and we all know that. So I just think we need to hang in there and weather this storm.
Mr. Guest, would you support the tariff policy, and what do you think it means for Mississippi?
I'm a believer in free markets, so I'm generally opposed to tariffs. There would be two exceptions to that. One, if there is proof of unfair trade practices by one of our trade partners. We must have a level playing field. And so as long as the playing field is level, I would not support tariffs for that reason. The other reason that I will support tariffs if it protects an industry that is vital to our national security. Our agriculture, our steel, our petroleum, we cannot be held hostage to foreign nations for those things that would be necessary for us as a country in a time of national crisis. So absent one of those two things, absent the proof of unfair trade practice, or absent the need to protect an industry that is vital to our national security, I would not support tariffs against China or any of our other trading partners.
So there's many polls out there, hopefully to bridge the gap between those that are in state legislature and federal legislature with what the public thinks about what's happening. In a Reuters poll in 2016, they found that 72% of Americans believe the economy is rigged to favor the rich and the powerful. Do you believe that the quote-unquote 1% are favored in how our government and our economy carries on its business? If so, how would you seek to curb corporate cronyism in Washington, D.C.? And if you don't agree with this, why not? We are going to start with you, Mr. Parker.
Sure. So the question, I believe, was how we're going to curb corporate cronyism and political in Washington?
Yes.
Great. So we would start with term limits. And, going to Washington should not be about getting rich. We have, well, let's just use the favorite example. Nancy Pelosi's gone to Washington. What's she worth, $90 million now? I don't really understand how that works at $174,000 a year. But I think that is a concrete step to drain the swamp, and it is a step in the right direction. You know, America was founded on the citizen legislator model. I believe a step back towards the citizen legislator model, where you have your private life, you go and serve in government, and then you return home, was how the founding fathers originally talked about in the Constitution. What we have today, we tend to have career politicians. I don't think that is leading us in the right direction, either across the U.S. or in Mississippi. And so I think the answer to your question is that is one concrete step, is term limits.
Mr. Hughes, again, the question, as Mr. Parker said, was, do you agree that the economy is rigged in favor of the rich and the powerful, and how would you curb corporate cronyism in Washington, D.C.?
I don't necessarily agree with that notion, and I'll use the recent tax reform as an example of that. You know, sometimes the word on the street is that it only benefited the top 1% or the super wealthy. This recent tax reform, it lowered taxes for businesses of all sizes. The numbers show that it's impacting over 80% of Americans in a positive way. So what are the results of that? You're seeing bonuses, you're seeing increased wages and earnings, you're seeing increased optimism. I read that a National Association of Manufacturers poll showed that the optimism in their membership right now is between 93 and 94%. I saw an NFIB survey that said for the first time in almost 40 years, the number one topic on the minds of their membership is not what in the world are we going to do on taxes. So that tax reform is a great example of how the reality doesn't always match up with the word on the street. Now, from a corporate cronyism perspective, you know, there are lots of discussions these days about Mississippi as it relates to earmarks. You know, I'm not necessarily in favor of earmarks per se, because I just believe we've got to do something about our debt and our spending. And when you get to that earmarks discussion, that becomes a platform for runaway spending, and we got to be careful about that. But I do believe in the appropriations process. And I do believe that members of Congress ought to be driving the decision-making on appropriations. They're the ones in touch with the needs and the interests of the communities in their district, and they're certainly in better position to make appropriations decisions than some random bureaucrat at a federal agency.
Mrs. Doty?
I certainly think that tax reform has done some good work and maybe changing that perspective, because we've heard about so many workers who've gotten a bonus or gotten a raise, and contrary to what we heard from Nancy Pelosi, it's a significant amount. It's not a crumb. So hopefully that is doing something to inspire some trust in the American people. As far as curbing cronyism, what I see is that we cannot invest in unproven technology or try to drive a particular agenda that perhaps is unproven. And we've seen this really with the clean coal agenda and different things regarding energy. And I just don't think it is the purpose of our federal government to pick winners and losers. Now, before I get that question handed back to me, I feel like my service in the state legislature, we do offer tax incentives to certain businesses when we're trying to attract businesses. The Yokohama Tire, Continental Tire that have come into the state. I think that's a totally different situation, because we are competing with other states in our region and offering an incentive package that will get them to our state. And again, they are proven business and industry that has a track record. And we've gotten pretty careful in the legislature too in the past few years to make sure that these are good investments. We have clawback provisions in these incentive packages so the taxpayers of Mississippi are protected.
Mrs. Tate?
Yes, let me clarify also one thing. Free markets, I'm a complete believer in free markets domestically, but I did say, yes, tariffs are necessary as a restraint, sometimes dealing with foreign markets. Regarding corporate cronyism, I try to simplify things. We know that corporations effectively can manipulate their budgets so that they don't pay taxes so much, they just pass it on to the consumer. I would go for a 0% corporate tax, and let's just be honest about that. that may reform some of the cronyism. And I would also eliminate income tax. That's a whole other subject. But 0% corporate tax may help.
Mr. Gass, the same question.
I do not agree that I think our economy only favors the extremely wealthy. As I've traveled throughout the district and spoken to people, I've talked to many people who have begun with nothing. And through hard work, in whatever industry they may be in, they have been able to build a business. They have been able, through the hard work and through the things that they've done, they have been able to be successful. And so I believe that our economy is not rigged toward those who are rich, but is rigged toward those who are hardworking, those who want to accomplish something, those who are willing to go the extra mile. So many people today, they don't want hard work. They want things given to them. And so I believe that our economy rewards those who work hard. Now, corporate cronyism and what we do to try to curtail corporate cronyism, I believe one of the things we need to do is we need to curb lobbyists in Washington, D.C. It appears that too much of our legislation is driven by lobbyists who are lobbying on behalf of their clients. And I believe legislation should be driven by legislators who want to do the best thing for their constituents and want to do the best thing for America. And so we should not have legislation that is drafted that helps certain corporations, one corporation over another. We should draft legislation that improves this country for each and every one of us. So because of that, those would be the things that I believe would help us as we are looking at passing laws that would benefit each and every one of us.
Mrs. Dunn?
So, like I said earlier, my husband and I own a restaurant, small restaurant in McGee, Zips Cafe. And this was the first year in 3 years that we were able, we've owned it for 3 years. His grandfather started it 55 years ago. This is the first year that we actually gave bonuses to our employees for the tax cuts. That's direct, positive happenings that's going on in the government. As far as the one percenters, we live in the most wonderful country in the world. The opportunity of growing exists only in the United States the way it does. We have people, obviously, that want to come here from nothing, and we have success stories. So I do not believe that we are, what'd you put it, economy being rigged for the one percenters. No, it's not rigged for the one percenters, or we wouldn't have success stories about small businesses developing into big businesses. And Gerard, for example, Venture Tech, started in Mississippi and he's now in 6 states from nothing. That doesn't happen if it's rigged. Secondly, from the corporate cronyism, I agree term limits are important. But I also believe the more government you have meddling in economy like small business and healthcare and state, you get corruption all across the board. We have to take regulation out of the daily living of us people that are trying to build businesses and success stories and longevity of families living in Mississippi I want my kids to live in Mississippi. So it's important that we take regulation out of the federal government, which means limit lobbyists, term limits. Now that's hard to say when you say limit lobbyist. Thank you.
Thank you. All of you, you have varied backgrounds. Wanted to ask you at this point, what do you believe sets you apart or makes you more qualified than your opponents in this race? Feel free to mention your opponents. This is a debate. Y'all have been very polite. Feel free to stop doing that at any point. No, seriously, what do you believe sets you apart, or what would you tell voters is the reason to choose you from this group?
Me first?
Yes, sir.
Well, I have to be polite. I'm seeing these folks every day, especially this week. Listen, I've traveled in all 24 counties. I've been in all these counties a lot, and I can tell you what voters want is somebody that's focused on more jobs, a stronger economy, and somebody that understands economic development. And so in that context, I can tell you that I believe I know the 3rd District better than anybody else in this race. I believe I understand economic development better than anybody else in this race. Now, when you have that discussion and you talk about job creation, you have to make sure you can talk about a strong tax and regulatory environment. We can't keep spending the way we're spending. We can't keep borrowing money the way we're borrowing money. That strong tax and regulatory environment is key to economic development. I talked about the tax reform package earlier, right? I want to go to Washington, D.C. and represent this district and help President Trump continue to fight on deregulation, on topics like Dodd-Frank. I mean, this is legislation designed to regulate the banking industry. It comes out and you have 28,000 new regulations on the banking industry, and it cripples our main streets in the communities around our state. Community banks are the lifeblood of our communities. And when you put those kind of regulations on them, they're not able to hire more loan officers to provide access to capital for farmers and small businesses. They have to spend those resources hiring more accountants and more compliance officers simply so they can comply with all the regulations that the federal government's putting on top of us.
Thank you. Ms. Stody?
What sets me apart is my legislative experience, because this is a job as a legislator. It is not as an economic developer for the 3rd District, although we certainly have folks who might have been in that field. The communities in the 24 counties, and all of us have spent time in these 24 counties. The communities know what they need. They do. I've spoken to folks in Philadelphia who talked about a 10-mile road of a 10-mile segment of Highway 19 that they need 4-lane to connect to the next town. They need different areas need different things. They know what they need. They need a legislator who can get it done for them. And Mississippi has a strong history of sending someone with a strong legislative background to Congress, especially with the changes that we have in our congressional delegation now. I think it is more important than ever. And I'm going to tell you, there is a learning curve, and I've had that learning curve here in the state of Mississippi. I certainly know it's a different arena in Washington. It's a larger arena, but it is the same stage. You have to understand how to get your legislation into that bill and walk it through and baby it through the whole way. I've had experience doing that. I understand how difficult it is, how extremely difficult it is. And I think that legislative experience would be invaluable to the voters of the 3rd District. Very briefly, I want to talk about term limits. I believe we have term limits already, especially in the House. We have elections every 2 years. The voters decide who will be there every 2 years and exercise their right to provide term limits. If we have term limits in Congress, these lobbyists that we talk about are going to be even more powerful, because they're going to be the only ones who really understand these different policies and will have more power.
Thank you. Mr. Hughes, I would give you an opportunity. I think you were sort of mentioned by reference there. You don't have to, but if you care to rebut that.
Well, let me say this. I'm not a career politician. I haven't entered this race as an extension of needing to climb the ladder and go to Washington, D.C. and be somebody. I'm in this race because I care. I'm in this race for the right reasons, and I believe I'm the best person for the job.
Thank you. I believe we now go to you.
I'm not going to say anything bad about these fine people, because it's been an honor to get to know them, and we can't go wrong with any one of them. I will say that from my heart. I'm just honored to be here. But what sets me apart? I will share this with you. I'm so patriotic, and I thought, our founders had a secret. It took me 3 years to figure out this secret in a PhD program, and that was no small feat for an artist to get into a PhD program, but I am. And I've been researching this and looking at our founders' writings. Their writings read like sermons. I know they were devout Christians, with the exception of perhaps Jefferson. I call him Thomas Pretty Boy Jefferson. But nevertheless, why did they not name the name of Jesus in their political documents? Let me tell you why. They understood the complexity of government, the complexity of society, all boils down to one word, and that is Jesus. What does that mean? Personal relationship. Government has to get out of things that are supposed to be personal. Okay? Healthcare, education, business. And that discovery rocked my world, and it hasn't been too long that I discovered that, so I want to share that. That is my passion, to somehow play a role in returning government to that society to the individual relationship. Get the government out of our business, let them do the military that they're supposed to, let them do the infrastructure, and let us handle our business.
Thank you. Mr. Guest.
You know, I think we've seen a recent history of sending prosecutors to Washington, D.C. to represent our country. I think in the 1st Congressional District, Trent Kelly, the district attorney from Tupelo, who was elected and who has represented our state so well. I think of one of my personal favorite representatives from South Carolina, Trey Gowdy, the man that we see constantly fighting on behalf of the American people. And so I believe what sets me apart from my opponents on this stage is I have a record for fighting for the people of Mississippi. As a prosecutor, I've worked with our men and women of law enforcement to keep our communities safe and see that they are great places to live and to worship and raise a family. I've taken on as a prosecutor complex cases, crimes of violence, murder, capital murder. And those cases require extreme preparation. There are many moving parts. And so if you are going to be successful in the courtroom, just as if you are going to be successful in Washington, you have to be the most prepared person in that room. If you're going to get something done in Washington, you have to have morals, you have to have beliefs, and you have to say that there are certain lines that you will never cross. And you also have to be prepared to work with others to accomplish what is right. Mississippi has a very small congressional delegation, 4 representatives for our state. And so if we as Mississippians are going to get anything done for our state of Mississippi, we're going to have to send someone to Washington, D.C. who will fight on our behalf. And I'm that person.
Thank you. Mrs. Dunn.
I'm a business leader. I'm not a politician. I understand a budget, and I understand the difference between revenue and expenses. I also know Mississippi, which I think is the most important thing. I've built my life around understanding Mississippi as a whole in District 3. No offense, President Trump does not need another lawyer. We do not need another politician. We do not need someone that understands the game of politics. We need someone that's actually going to take real life understanding of the real world because D.C. has completely lost touch of reality. They've lost touch of what goes on in Mississippi and in District 3. I will be the true citizen legislator that our founding fathers envisioned when they wrote the Constitution.
Thank you. I'll just open it up. If anyone felt like they were referenced by proxy or anything,
I knew you were going to do that.
Raise your hand.
Stating facts is not.
I think you covered the bases.
Yeah.
Actually,
Stating facts is not pointed at any of these wonderful candidates with me.
Sure. Thank you.
This is a tough one, Jeff, because Ida and I live in Covington County, and so we spend a lot of time in hotels as we're going across all 24 counties, and the guests were very kind to offer us to come to their home and spend the night soon. So we have become close friends. And by all accounts, DA Guest has been a very good DA. Having said that, we do have a lot of prosecutors in Washington. We don't need another prosecutor in Washington. We need DA. We need DA Guest staying right where he is. That's where I would start. And we do strong we've been sending strong legislators from the state of Mississippi for 50 years. Guys, we're 50th. Let's not lose sight of that. State as a whole, we're 50th. So how are we going to do something different? That's what we're here talking about tonight. To do better, we have to do something different. In 1996, it was a tough year. It was a good year for me. We, a group primarily in Gettysburg, got together and founded a bank. I would fly back and forth between London, where I was working for Goldman Sachs. It took 14 hours and 28 minutes to get from Heathrow to the Gettysburg airport. I think that we were trying to make payroll. We had a staff of about 12 to start, and it was very difficult. We had to come up with the funds. We got it done. Today, over 530 people, I think, at last count, work at that institution. It's been a great thing throughout the state of Mississippi, I believe, promoting economic development. It's happening. I think that year, Whit was studying the playbook. I'm not sure. I didn't get a chance to watch as much ball as I would like, but I hear he played some ball at Mississippi State. If you want to talk about economic development, please go to perryparker.org. Just, check the records, what I would say there. What I want to do is serve the state of Mississippi. We have a chance here to really grow, guys, and this is a big decision. I can help us grow. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe Mr. Guest, Mr. Hughes, and Ms. Doty, you all certainly can have a rebuttal there.
I'll just say that I'm proud of my record as a prosecutor. I'm proud of what I've been able to accomplish along with my staff over the last 10 years. I think we see that there has been great economic development in Rankin and Madison County, and I believe a large portion of that has been driven by public safety. Everyone on this stage has a unique skill set, and it's up to the voters to determine who they choose to send to Washington, D.C. But again, if you want to send someone who has a proven record of fighting on your behalf, I believe that I'm the candidate that you should send to Washington.
Thank you. Ms. Doty.
I really consider my time in the Mississippi legislature as being public service, not as being a politician. We are, again, part-time legislators. We get paid very little, contrary to what all my teenagers' friends think. We don't get paid a lot. We're there for 90-day sessions. And it has really been my honor to serve my constituents because also part of it is constituent services, and we really haven't talked about that tonight too. I understand the importance of being that person who can help your constituents get through to a state agency or a federal agency, and that is a very important part of the job. As far as there being it's some sort of political game or whatever, there is a little bit of, it is politics. And it is difficult to get legislation passed. It is really a skill. You learn how to develop coalitions. You learn how to build bases. You really have to balance the needs of your constituents with the needs of other members and somehow make all of that work. So I'm very proud of my service in the Mississippi State Senate and think it would only benefit the voters of the 3rd District.
Mr. Hughes, would you care?
I'll just say briefly that I've, as I mentioned earlier, for 12 weeks I've been campaigning in all 24 counties, thousands of conversations with voters. I can tell you in a very genuine way, the number one thing on people's minds is somebody that's going to be focused on more jobs and a stronger economy, and somebody who understands economic development. I believe I'm the only one on this stage that has genuine, direct economic development experience, and I believe that makes me the best person for this job.
Thank you. We're going to close with 2 questions, one that will be a quick yes or no question down the line, and one that will be a little bit longer question. The first question that will be the yes or no question. As President Trump and some others in D.C. have talked about federal infrastructure, one of the proposals that's been thrown out is a 25-cent federal gas tax increase. A study by Freedom Partners Chamber of Commerce said that Mississippi would be impacted the most by that kind of increase because our people drive more to get to and from work. It's about a $390 tax increase for the average household in Mississippi. Would you support a federal gas tax increase? Yes or no? We'll start with Ms. Tate.
No.
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 No, sir.
No.
No.
That was easy. The second question is this. 43 Republicans that are currently serving in Congress have decided not to run for re-election in 2018. Obviously, the Speaker of the House is one. Congressman Harper is one. Trey Gowdy, who D.A. Guest mentioned, is one. In fact, Gowdy said his time in Congress had been a waste, that his entire time in Congress had been a waste. What are you going to do if you're lucky enough to win the Republican nomination and win this congressional seat? so that at the end of the first 2 years, you can say, this is a measure of success. What is your measure of success if you're lucky enough to become the congressman from the 3rd Congressional District? I don't even know where we were. I think we might have been on Senator Doty.
So I had the same experience when I was elected to the Mississippi Senate. I got there and looked around and thought, there's really a lot of folks in leadership who control everything. So what am I going to do in the meantime to really do something for my constituents? And I looked for those areas that I could have some meaningful impact in while working myself up in seniority. Because whether or not we like it, that is the way our Congress works, the way the Mississippi legislature works. It is the way the House of Representatives works. It is seniority. So, therefore, if we have term limits, I think there would be a total, I don't know what it would do to that. But I would look for those instances, for those people that I've talked to. We've all traveled across these 24 counties. We've all talked to thousands of people. And I would listen to them and try to help with particular instances, particular needs in these different counties, while maintaining the line and protecting the values, the core values that we have here in Mississippi, values that are really different than a lot of the United States, our values of family and faith, and all the while looking at everything I can to limit government and protect our Constitution. So I think you hold the line on growth in government, and also I would see as a personal measure of success for us to pass a balanced budget amendment and to balance the budget.
Ms. Tate?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
I haven't thought about, because as an artist, I'm a romantic and idealist. I go about every day thinking it's a success, and just every day is wonderful. But having said that, I was, if we could just offer up Mississippi as a pilot program, as a laboratory, to just implement some of these ideas that everybody says is a good idea, implement them, do them, take the risk. We could be in the vanguard of something really new, to believe in the individual. If they had to, they could get off their rear and work and be creative and innovative. If they had to, we could take away this massive health care bureaucracy. If we had to, we'd get the government out of education and go back to the common schools where parents were in control. So maybe I could hope and dream about that being a success, that we could offer ourselves as a laboratory, a pilot program. Try it. We've got nothing to lose, like Trump said. We're last.
D.A., guess what does success look like 2 years into a congressional term for you?
If I could accomplish one thing in Congress, it would be to secure our border and address immigration. That has been one of the issues that our president was elected on. I see our southwest border both as an immigration issue and a crime issue. As a prosecutor, the large amount of narcotics that come into our country flow across our southwest border. Most of the drugs that we see on our streets here in our communities, those drugs are not manufactured here. Those drugs are manufactured in Mexico, they're manufactured in South America, and then those drugs are trafficked across our southwest border and then distributed using our highways, our interstate systems around this country. And so I believe that securing our borders should be the first priority that we have. We have to stop illegal immigration. I'm not against immigration, but I'm against illegal immigration. We have a legal immigration system, and I believe we need to continue that. We as a country should be able to bring in the individuals that we want with us. We should be able to bring in the best and the brightest. Areas where we have needs, areas such as the field of medicine, programming, engineering. Those are the people that we need to bring into our country. And so I believe that if we could do one thing, and do one thing that will impact this country, not just for the near future, but for the long term, it would be to secure our border and address immigration.
Mrs. Dunn?
So I believe, if I were lucky enough to represent District 3, that there are 3 things that I would like to say that I have done in 2 years. One, we've got to get our health care delivery system solid. Right now, hospitals, physicians are retiring. Our physicians are retiring because they don't want to deal with federal government. Our hospitals are closing because we haven't reformed from Obamacare. We have individuals not having health insurance, which end up in our ER, which only increase our taxpayer dollars to pay for. I'm going to give you one example on the healthcare side. Part of stabilizing Mississippi's healthcare infrastructure is allowing the state, our governor, to decide on what is determined as a necessary provider and not the federal government deciding. We've had 3 hospitals close in our rural areas, 1 in District 3 in Newton County, and it's because of the federal government. So that's 1. 2, infrastructure. Broadband.com ranks us as 49th. That's in internet connectivity. District 3 has the highest percentage of non-access to internet and broadband. I'm not talking about using your mobile phones. I'm talking about running your business. People can't run your business when you don't have broadband and internet access. We can't move Mississippi. We can't get out of the high 40s if we're not moving towards the future, which is broadband and internet. Number 3, another resource strain, as DA Guest pointed out, is immigration. We've got to build the wall. I've been to a town, Douglas, Arizona, looked them up. I consulted with them 8 years ago. Crap. My bad. That's the non-politician in me.
So it's hard to follow that, Russ. Russ, I've seen the power of investment lifting lives up. It's lifted my family's life up. So that's what I'm running on. I believe investment dollars into the 3rd District and into Mississippi will grow incomes, and it will make lives better here. It will grow the average family income, and that will make everyone's life better. So here's how we could do that. Here's how we measure it. We're going to put on day 1 on the website the average family income in Meridian, in Macomb, over the whole 3rd District, in Madison, in Starkville. Here are the different numbers for the different cities, the different counties. Here's the numbers for the nation. Here's the numbers for Louisiana, Alabama, our immediate competitors. And let's compare the growth rate over the first 2 years. Who knows? We could go into a recession. We don't know what the future will bring. But I believe that Mississippi, if we focus on bringing investment dollars, on getting our entrepreneurs to raise their expectations and to invest more, and the power of this office can do that. It is a powerful office. We will see those numbers change, and it will make people's lives better in the 3rd District in the state of Mississippi. So the numbers will be right on the website, Russ. You've got a lot of numbers on your website. It'll be straightforward. And in 2 years, we'll see the change. And by the way, if we don't, that'll be something to run on or not run on in 2 years, Russ.
Mr. Hughes?
Russ, let me say this. On a personal level, I'm going to measure my success by whether I represent this district in a way that glorifies God and makes Shelley and my family proud. Professionally speaking, I'll tell you, you bring up an interesting topic. Who knows what the numbers will look like? Hopefully conservatives will still be in the majority. But regardless, issues like improved process, that's not a partisan issue. Eliminating waste and fraud and abuse, those are not partisan issues. Balancing a budget, that's not a partisan issue. If you elect me to Congress, I'm going to go and I'm going to fight for more jobs and a stronger economy. Lower taxes, fewer regulations, getting the government out of our way so we can be successful. I'm going to fight for immigration reform and securing the border. I'm going to fight the debt and spending that we've talked about tonight. I'm going to support the military and our veterans. And I'm going to work hard every day for every community and every county in this district. And then professionally speaking, I'll measure my success by the folks in this room reelecting me again in 2 years.
Thank you. I believe we're now to the closing statements. Again, you each get 2 minutes, and I believe, Ms. Doty, you go first.
So tonight I've talked a lot about being a lawmaker, but of course I'm not only a senator, but I am a mom of 3 young adults. My last one graduates from Brookhaven High School in about a month. I have been a caregiver for my aging parents. I've been an attorney, practiced in a variety of different ways in the defense world. I have also managed a small business and made those loan payments and payroll. So I have a very broad experience level combined with my time serving in the Mississippi legislature. And again, the folks who are up here on this stage are all great people. But we've all heard a lot of lofty ideals tonight and lofty plans. And I guess I'm much more of a realist. And that comes from my service in the Mississippi legislature. I know that it is about getting your legislation passed. And you can fight all you want, you can talk all you want, you can have 1,000 people following you on social media, you can be on the news, but if you do not get your legislation passed, the voters of the 3rd District are left out. The state of Mississippi is left out. So my experience is invaluable in that regard, and I have as much care and concern for the folks in the 3rd District as I know all of the people up here do, because we're all Mississippians. I believe we've all grown up here, and it is special in my heart, as I know it is in yours, because all of you are giving up your time to be here tonight. So again, I ask for your vote and your support, and to really think about what this job requires and what this job is. I've been accountable to my constituents in Lincoln County. I represent 4 counties. I will be accountable to all 24 counties and accessible in that job as congressman.
Thank you. Ms. Tate, I believe you go next.
Well, I just want to thank every one of you for being here, and thank you for hosting this event, Americans for Prosperity. Every one of you is no doubt a patriot and loves our country, and I believe deep down you know we can do better in Mississippi, and you want somebody who's just fool enough to believe that we can do better. I have no question in my mind. And from my past experience, I will say this: I have been in jobs that I had no idea what to do, but I saw what had to be done day by day. Went to Texas by myself. I ended up hiring 6 people to help me get a warehouse, manage the warehouse, and grew the account almost 3 times its original size. I can do that if necessary. I can listen if necessary. I can sway people to my views when I know it's the right thing to do. For example, getting our arts school started and things like that. It wasn't even my idea. But when I was charged with getting it done, we got it done. So I can get things done by the grace of God. I just thank you for listening to us, and hope you'll make the decision that I'm truly different, and I could get things done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hughes, you're next.
As a candidate, you're often asked, what motivated you to get in this race? So let me just share with you, I'm driven by faith and by family. I believe I'm answering a call to service. Shelley and I feel prepared for this. We feel led in this direction. And we believe I'm the best person for the job. And I believe I'm going to be successful for the same reason I've been successful with other aspects of life. I'm willing to work harder than anybody else around me. I want you to know that if elected to Congress, the hard worker that you're seeing on the campaign trail now is going to be the same hard worker serving you in Congress. There's no better poll than talking to a candidate who's been everywhere in his or her district. As I've mentioned, I've been in all 24 counties, a lot. And I can tell you that voters want somebody focused on character, integrity, jobs and economy, somebody that understands economic development. They want a strong leader with some backbone, somebody that values principles over politics, and somebody that's willing to actually engage in the process and drive the kind of conservative legislation that Mississippians like you and me identify with. I'm ready to be that leader, and I'd like to have your support in this race. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gass?
On behalf of myself and the other candidates on the stage here today, I want to thank you for the opportunity to address you. And I want to make the same commitment to you that I've made to others along the campaign trail. First of all, I would be humbled for your vote and be honored for your support. I believe that I have a proven record for fighting for you. And I'm asking that you now send me to Washington, D.C., and you allow me to fight on behalf of the people of Mississippi, and you allow me to fight for our values. I believe we need a strong conservative congressman. I believe we need a congressman who has a proven record for fighting for what is right. I believe we need a congressman who will work with our president to see that tax cuts are not a one-time isolated event, but will work to continue to lower taxes and reduce regulation. We need a congressman who will work to address the needs of our aging infrastructure. We need a congressman who will work to secure our borders, who will work to stop the flow of illegal drugs coming into our country. I pledge to you that if you send me to Congress, that I will work every day to make you proud. I will work to see that we leave a better country for our children and our grandchildren. And I pledge to you that I will fight to see that we will forever remain one nation under God.
Thank you, Ms. Dunn.
So I was honored to be named one of the 50 leading businesswomen of Mississippi. Clearly, I'm not a politician. Y'all just heard my outburst. I'm sorry. I will be gotten on to that for that. My values, I'm a proud Republican. I believe in the Second Amendment strongly. I believe in a strong military. I believe that people, you, me, we spend our money better than the government does. I believe we need to cut more taxes. I believe that small businesses grow the economy, not the government. I also believe that President Trump, I should say, does not need another politician. He does not need another lawyer. He needs somebody with business skills and common sense. I've devoted my life, my work life, to health care. Obamacare ripped that away. That's my personal experience. I will commit to you that I will fix, along with President Trump, health care. And I will deregulate so Mississippi can decide how Mississippi needs to succeed. And I also will commit to bringing infrastructure to support our millennials and our kids to stay in Mississippi, because that is the only way that we are going to keep our state on the high trajectory path. I'm Morgan Dunn, and I'm asking for your vote in the primary on June 5th.
Thank you. Mr. Parker.
Thank you. My conservative Mississippi values have served me well in conducting business around the world and here at home. They will continue to serve me well as your congressman. In Washington, I will continue to advocate for term limits. I believe it is a concrete step to use the term draining the swamp, getting people to do their job, however you want to think about it. It is a change, and Washington needs change. I believe the citizen legislator model that I talked about earlier tonight is the right one. It's the correct one for the United States. That was the original model. We can go back to it. We don't have to have career politicians making all of the decisions in our lives. I want to leave you with something tonight. For Mississippi to do better, we have to do something different. It is my mission to, when our children today go off to Dallas and Atlanta for opportunities, my mission in running this office is to create opportunities here in the Metro Jackson area, in Meridian, and across the district, so that our children don't have to go off to Dallas and Atlanta. They will have those economic opportunities right here at home. I ask for your vote and support in making that happen. Thank you very much.
Please join me in giving a rousing round of applause to the candidates tonight. It is not easy to stand up there for 2 hours. If you'll just be seated for one quick moment. I want to say goodbye to y'all. I appreciate y'all sitting through this. I hope that you learned something. I certainly felt like I learned something listening to the candidates. How many of you in the audience would like to see something like this for the U.S. Senate for the special election? Okay, maybe we can make that happen. I need to thank a few people. Go ahead and sit back down for a second. I promise I'm not going to keep you long. I want to thank a few people that put this together that deserve some credit. So Jeff Pender and Sarah Ulmer did a great job, right? Sitting in the corner, she's running away right now, but Nicole Sutter is on our team. She does all the events. She put together this wonderful stage and what you see around you. Phil Harding and William Callan are on my team. You probably heard from them in the recruitment process to get people here. We also have John Rich, who's our communications director with Americans for Prosperity, who's done a good job coordinating with the media. Ronald Reagan said that freedom was never more than one generation away from extinction, that it wasn't passed down the bloodline, but that it was something that had to be fought for and protected and passed on so that that next generation could continue to fight. Tonight, you've had 6 people who stood on a stage for 2 hours and took questions, and they're in the arena. They're fighting. But you don't have to be someone that seeks political office to be in the arena. Every couple of years, we get very excited about elections, and they're important, and it makes sense. But the reason that elections are important is what happens between elections. The whole point of an election is to see good policy put into place. Yesterday was tax return day. Boo, right? It's no coincidence that we held this debate the day after tax return day, an organization that's largely dedicated to talking about tax policy. Americans will give to the federal government, state government, and local governments $5.2 trillion in taxes this year. That is 30% of the total economic output for our country. That's more than Americans spend on food, clothing, and housing combined. And despite the trillions of dollars that we give to government, as you heard from the stage, we are $21 trillion in debt, and it is growing at a rapid pace. So I think this is where citizens come into play. And I think this is your role in the arena, is to recognize that while we can send good people to Washington or to Jackson, it is ultimately our role to hold them accountable, not in D.C., not in Jackson, but in communities across Mississippi. That's the only way that we're ever going to realize that vision of a shining city on a hill. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for being patient, a good audience, no disruptions. We hope that you will come back to other Americans for Prosperity events. You can check us out online at americansforprosperity.org. Sign up to get our emails. We'd appreciate that. Y'all have a good night. Thank you.
This is the biggest thing you've done so far.